In Montana alone, the numbers are staggering, 170,000 elk. And when you throw out a number like that, you must think, wow, they're everywhere. But if you've hunted in the Bob Marshall Wilderness lately, or if you've just gone there for the summer and noticed that there's a sharp decline in the number of elk you're seeing, your eyes aren't lying. So what is actually going on? And this is definitely not just a Montana problem. This is a problem that is happening across the West in Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington. These are places where the problem is there are things being implemented in these areas, in those states, that was implemented in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Now, we don't have to guess what's going to happen. We know. We got the numbers right here. It's very obvious. So when you hear, oh, well, this, wolves are just a part of nature and you can look at the numbers, Idaho and Montana are doing great for elk numbers. They're using the total elk in the state, which is high, and it's what it's called is it's like double the objective. So if you look on the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks websites, you're going to see a lot of objective numbers. Now, just so you know, objective doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not a historical number. It doesn't mean this is the amount of elk we used to have there. It doesn't mean that this is a good number for the land, like this is what the land will sustain. It doesn't mean any of that. We're going to get into all that today, and we're going to use Montana as a case study for what's going to happen in these other states and what is happening currently, especially in places like Washington, eastern Washington, because they're right on the border of the panhandle of Idaho, so they're getting those wolves and high predator numbers already. So they're starting to see some of this. But you notice that what I'm talking about, you might say, well, what are you talking about? Because you're saying, wolf numbers and high predator numbers, but you just quoted to us that they're way above objective. So first of all, let's discover what objective is. So objective is let me get back to my notes here. I'm gonna have my notes to remember all these numbers and all that stuff. So objective, like I said, isn't what the land will hold. It isn't about what should be there historically. None of that. We're not even using any fantasy thing from 1805. We're using as objectives what will be tolerated by the landowners and lobbyists. And I'm serious about this. This is the numbers they come up with. So when you see objective number for elk in such and such of area, what they're meaning is how many elk will be tolerated in that area by the people who own land and livestock. Typically, this is ranchers, okay? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about how this creates a dynamic of conflict between hunters and ranchers, this very thing right here. And the reasons for it, and at the very end, I'm going to tell you the only ways to fix this. So we have to keep in mind what the problem is to be able to fix any of it, right? And we have to understand what the conflict is. Why do ranchers resent hunters and hunters resent ranchers when they should really be on the same side? I mean, you've seen all the stuff I'm talking about with how the predators are actually creating money for groups through litigation, through credit systems put down by the UN and the WEF. And that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but when you look at it, it's just going on. It's not even it's not a question. You can see right where they're selling the credits. So anyway, I just wanted you to understand that these things are going on, but also understand why. So when we understand objective is only about tolerance, then we have to understand why they're not being tolerated, for one thing. So ranchers or landowners, they literally pay to feed our wildlife. So their grass that they could use for, and I guess I'm going on the line that you're using it for production. So if you're using your land for production, excuse me, then you want that grass to go into your cattle, right? You want the feed, the hayfield, to go into your cattle. You want that vegetation to go into your cattle, which produces beef, which then you can sell and make money on. Or sheep produces wool that you can sell and make money on. Or whatever you're raising can then produce something for you out of that ground, right? So the more elk that are on it, the less you can use that grass for. Elk, a large portion of Montana and the West is private. And in some states it's way more public than private, but Montana's, a third to two-thirds. A third public to two-thirds private. So you got to think that these elk and deer and all this wildlife is actually feeding. So the rancher is really paying out of his stock of forage to feed the wildlife that you're then hunting or enjoying on public land, because they move back and forth. Very often, usually it's, winter down lower, which is typically private, and summer up higher, which is typically mountains and stuff. This is before we have this issue of distribution. So that is why there is a tolerance issue, because the more elk come down onto private land, the more they eat, which cuts into the rancher's bottom line. He's really actually paying for those wildlife. So the tolerance level has to be, how many will he tolerate feeding, basically, before we have a damage hunt and, start moving them off and doing things to try to limit the amount of elk on that private land. Now, I'm going to get back to this, hopefully. Hopefully I can remember to get back to this, because there's a lot more I want to say on that. That's part of the issue we need to deal with. But public lands are usually the mountainous regions, right? And they're more remote. So there's the areas where predators can be tolerated far more than they can be out on the plains. They get into trouble immediately on the plains because there's nothing there but a bunch of cattle, right? Even if there's elk there, they're right in with the cattle on the private lower ground. So you're having more conflict. So the tolerance is way higher. I'm sorry. The tolerance is lower for predators out there than it is in the public ground mountainous areas like the Pioneer Mountains or the Bob Marshall Wilderness. So you got 170,000 elk in the state, and they keep selling this to you all the time. And this is going to be a huge warning for Colorado, because Colorado is introducing these large predators into their system. They really haven't had many grizzly bears. They really haven't had these top tier predators. And I was so amazed when I was driving through Colorado when I did the first series on the wolf introduction, when I did that series of videos, and I was driving through Colorado and was like, well, there's a herd of mule deer, there's a herd of mule deer, there's a herd of mule deer. I'm like, you know what? I remember when you could drive through the public land of Montana and see mule deer all over. Like this. I saw them in large herds in the hayfields of ranchers. You don't see that at all around where I live or the places that I hunt and enjoy. You just don't see it. You see some mule deer, but very few comparatively. So Colorado's in a position where they have large herds of wildlife, which is what I call abundance, the abundance state. When you're in that state of abundance where you're managing your predators, or you really don't have any, like Colorado didn't, major predators, it's a lot easier to manage your wildlife. You get hunters managing the numbers on your public land, and you get this beautiful abundance of wildlife. So that's what we're talking about, where we now have in 170, I got to collect my thoughts here. Apparently I lost my train of thought. So yes, we have 170,000 elk. I rarely count deer, I don't know why, but elk. But where are those elk standing? That's the question we should be asking. Not how many are there over the whole state of Montana. It's like I said in the opening statement, when you go up into these public areas that you want to enjoy and hunt in, and you don't see game, this is why. So first you have what's called, what I'm going to call the predator silo, which is you cannot manage prey with the predator while the predator is off limits. So it's definitely a biological error. We have to force the agencies to manage that whole bucket. So what we're having now is when you say 170,000 elk, and we're just talking about elk, I don't know why we concentrate on them solely, but anyway, in places like the Bob Marshall, it is such a disaster as far as elk goes now. For the last 30 years, they've been declining so much. And it's not just the wolf. We have an enormous amount of predators in the Bob Marshall. I used to go into the Bob Marshall, on the edges of the Bob Marshall anyway, quite often hunting. I used to hunt around the edges all the time. And I would see, I think I saw one grizzly bear for, in my 20s and 30s, actually, maybe one. And in the last 15 years, I've seen at least one bear every time I've gone there. They are so prolific in there. They're out of control on those areas. In fact, they're pushing right out into the plains, and they're having to deal with them all the way out into the prairies. So when you have that many large predators, and now we have wolves, and we've had wolves there for 30 years, you're seeing a massive decline in the population. And guess what? Since that's a public area, then you have the public hunting community hunting the same area. So you have an area where it's declining. It's not questionable. It's massively declined in numbers of elk. And then that's where the people can easily access hunting. So they're going to these areas and hunting the now limited amounts of elk that are on this property. Now, the one thing that's massively different is humans harvest adult animals only. The real problem with the elk population in the Bob Marshall specifically is not the adult elk, it's the actual calf recruitment rate. So the calf recruitment rate means the number of calf elk, baby elk, that reach adulthood. And that percentage right now is 10 to 15%. So that means out of every 100 elk that are born, 10 of them or 15 of them are making it to adulthood. You cannot sustain a population. If you have predators also, because wolves kill a lot of adult elk. Grizzly bears, I'm not sure if they kill a lot of adult elk, but they kill a lot of babies. And so do the wolves. So now you're killing off the adult elk with predators. You're killing off literally 90 babies out of every 100 that are born. And you expect to have a population of elk that goes up. That's ridiculous. Well, one of the problems is the way they manage elk herds in all across the West is typically they separate, and I've heard this over and over again. When you talk to biologists, it's like they separate the predator from the prey in their management. It's like, we're going to manage the objective for the elk number, but we're going to manage the predator based on what the federal government tells us we have to have. So you have 300 wolves in this area. The population of game is going like this, and you're not even connecting the two in the same. You're managing this one for a 300 number and this one for a 2000 number, let's say, but you're not associating the two. So you can't say, okay, we have too many predators because the population has dropped. You can't even say that because they're two different buckets of management. So the number one thing we have to do to fix this is to force the agencies to have to combine the two. You cannot manage prey without considering the number of predators. You can't do it. Well, you can manage you can manage the population of prey down to absolutely nothing. You can do that. But that's how they're managing. I've heard this over the years and it never made sense to me. And I'm like, is this really happening? And it's true. This is how they manage them. They manage the elk separately from the predators. And they don't even assign that the predator is having an effect on the prey animals. It's not even in the same conversation. Now, how can you manage the Bob Marshall Wilderness without considering how many babies are being killed by wolves? You can't manage it properly without that combined. You have to work together. They have to talk to each other or you have a disaster. So we have these large areas of public ground where the calf recruitment is almost nothing, right? We're also killing the adult elk through predators and then hunting on top of it. So you're taking out the more animals that are already being decimated. So something has to change there. I would prefer it wasn't that we limited hunters, which is what's going to happen. Right now, I believe that predators have more rights than hunters do, than humans do. So we will manage our predator populations, which is wolves, mountain lions, and grizzly bears, into way over numbers that can be sustainable. And then when our populations of game go down, guess who gets kicked out? It isn't the predators, because they're protected by the federal government most of the time. The grizzly bears are, and so are the wolves to a certain extent. So it's the hunter that gets kicked out. So this cannot continue to have healthy game populations, especially where we can actually hunt and enjoy them. Now, where the population is booming above objectives, keep in mind, this is not booming like, oh my goodness, the land can't sustain them. It's booming on private land, down low, out on the prairies, where it's above tolerant levels, not above sustainable levels for that wildlife. Okay, right now, though, keep this in mind for later. Hopefully I'll get back to it again. And this is what I was going to discuss. Right now, the elk and deer are actually just a negative to the rancher, to the landowner, unless they're, Nature Conservancy or another land trust company who owns land solely for the purpose of making conservation, which then they're selling the credits, which makes the predators worth way more money. So they're going to want more predators on that land. So I'm not saying that's good. That's not the way we want to go. We do not want to get into a conservation over human, where humans hands-off conservation situation. But on that private land, we have to change the way we view that. And that's not something you can really legislate without taking away the rights of either the hunter or the landowner. So that's something we need to talk about. And I'm going to try to talk about that at the end of this. So we also have, all right, so this is happening in Montana. This is like I said, this is a case study. So the case study is if you just manage the predators aside from the prey, you're going to have this sustainable balance of nature. This is the lie that's told. Now, it's always interesting because when I say lie, what I mean is the best lies, the ones that people actually accept are always wrapped in truth. They're combined with truth so that they're accepted. But you accept the lie because there's partly truth in there. And the truth is that when you have a situation where humans are not, like Yellowstone Park, right? And that caused the elk population to boom and they overgrazed everything. Then you put in wolves and they just decimate the elk population. In 10 years, the elk population goes down by 16,000 elk, because they're wiping out 100% of the calf recruitment and all the adults. And then humans come back in. They don't ever tell you this part, but humans come back in and start managing the wolves around the park. And all of a sudden you have that stop, right? But they use that as see, you can have wildlife, you can have predators managing your wildlife to this magical utopia balance. Well, if we wouldn't have started hunting the wolves, what would have happened? It's not like the wolves are going to say, oh, you know what? I think we're at objective. Wolves don't care what objective is. So that's what I mean is there is truth to it because, yes, predators do manage, in a way, the population numbers. But they don't have a conscience. So they don't care how many babies they kill. And let's just, as an example, I will say mule deer in Montana right now are like at 50 to 60% recruitment out in eastern part of the state. But in the western part of the state, there's 20% baby recruitment. So only 20% in a lot of areas in the West of mule deer fawns are making it to adulthood. That's not increasing the population, it's decreasing. Out east, you know, I think it might even be higher. 50 to 60% of the babies are surviving. That means 40% are being killed out east. In the West, 80% are being killed. You know what? What the percentage of humans, what the percentage is of the babies of mule deer and elk are being killed by humans directly is 0. That's my point. Without a conscience, that I know hunters that will go hunt big game animals to eat that would almost or literally risk their life to save a baby animal of the same species that they will hunt later in life as that thing gets older. That is the difference between us and the wild predators. The predators do not have a conscience. So you cannot think that because they do manage populations or they decrease populations, let's say, they don't manage them, just because they decrease populations of game animals, which is true, doesn't mean that they will manage or ever come to any equilibrium in nature, because they don't have a conscience. They don't care. The last baby elk in the world will be standing in front of a wolf, and you think it's going to go, you know what, we should conserve this last one. Absolutely not. They don't care. There is no conscience in the animal world. So you can't expect them to do that. They will not manage themselves. They will just overeat, and then starve to death. That's how it will happen. So we can't do that. We have to manage the population of predators, which is grizzly bears and wolves and mountain lions, alongside or in conjunction with the population of the wildlife we're trying to manage. And I believe we need to do that in a way to manage for abundance, what the land will support. In fact, if you manage for what the land will support, the land will produce more. That's science. You can look at it. If you decline the numbers of wildlife, you take out grazing out of the mountains, you end up with overgrown forests that burn hotter and faster, less habitat for the wildlife, less grass for the wildlife to eat, which is then less food for the predators, who then you're managing for a green desert instead of abundance, for lack instead of abundance, for chaos instead of order. So we need to manage those two things together, is my thing. Now, let's get to hunters versus landowners, because what this does right here is it creates an animosity between the hunter who goes into the mountains and sees no elk, right? Even a friend of mine posted a comment when I was talking about grazing on public land. He's like, I go hunting, and what you're saying is true, then we should see the elk following the cattle. What he means is, you go hunting, I know what it feels like. You go hunting for 6 miles, you don't see an elk, and all you see is what you think is grazed off land, because you don't understand grazing management of land. Then what that is you're associating, oh, it's the cattle that are causing the elk to not be here. That's not necessary. In fact, that's the opposite of what science says. So we can literally scientifically say that if you use cattle, especially in a regenerative grazing aspect, you can produce far more production for the wildlife. But when you have areas like this, you go into the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and now there is only 1,000 elk left in the whole Bob Marshall Wilderness. It's a massive wilderness area, and we only have 1,000 left. Granted, they're hard to count because of all the timber. When they come out for the winter, you can count them. 1,000 elk in the Bob Marshall, they've been declining for 30 years drastically. Now, I didn't even look up. There's not as good a numbers ready for mule deer, because they're even harder to count, and moose. But if the elk are drastically declining, so are those animals, right? So we don't even know what the devastating effect on those is. So if you're going in there and you're seeing this, and then you come out and you drive past the rancher's pivot where there's 500 elk standing there, you're going, he's the problem. This is how this works. You don't see elk here and you see elk there, and he's the problem. This is, I'm going to go at it from the hunter's side first, and I'm going to show you the rancher's side. And so what they're also seeing is they're seeing that rancher. I'm going to be hard on ranchers here a little bit, because this is, we have to talk about the real issues. We can't just ignore them. Hunters look at a rancher's hayfield, see all their elk out there, right? And then you see the rancher outfit on that property. He's making money off of those elk. That dirty rancher, he's making money off those elk. Then he goes to the Fish and Game and says, after the season, there's too many elk hitting my hayfield. You got to do something about it. Give me more tags. I know ranchers do this. I was in a coffee shop in Shoto one time, and this rancher was harping on the game warden like he has anything to say about it. You know, oh, you got to do something about those whitetails. They're just eating me out of house and home. He was only in there for 4 minutes. He probably says that every single day to the guy. That is what we're talking about with tolerance. So if you want more game animals, the tolerance thing has got to change. But that's not the only part that's got to change, because you can't just say, well, the rancher's got to foot the bill of feeding all those wildlife, right? But I also don't think that if they don't allow public access and they're outfitting that game, that then they should be able to get special tags. If they want to feed the game for their private business of outfitting, that's fine. This is my opinion. That's fine. You can do that. Make money on those animals, because I know how little ranchers make and how hard it is to make that money. So outfitting is a way that they can make ends meet. The more we can keep that rancher on the ground, the less that's going to go to some big corporate land trust that's going to lock everybody out and turn it into a reserve. Because and the main key with that is we do need a food supply. We've got to have an avenue for a food supply. Hunters forget this all the time. Those cattle that go into the range and actually do benefit the environment, but they can't see that, but they benefit the environment. If you take that aside, you have to consider our country needs a food supply. The more ranchers we put out of business, the more we have to import beef from somewhere else, which gives control of our actual food, the last thing we want to give control of, to some other country, some other person, some corporation. So you don't want to do that. So that's why if these ranchers want to outfit, great, that keeps them on that land. But then you can't do that, not give any public access, and then expect to get special treatment from the Fish and Wildlife Department. Special treatment that anybody else outside of having that ranch can't get. This is, the reality is, I am pro-rancher like you wouldn't believe. But I do understand that ranching, land ownership, grows into entitlements. Like, I'm better than you because I own land. A lot of it is just the fact that you were born to the right family and you inherited it. So I'm not saying that you should feel bad about that. I'm saying be grateful. Look at it as a grateful thing. I realize that's hard because you're stressed to the dang hilt. Ranchers work harder, and I don't mean this in like a flippant way. I mean this in a literal way. Ranchers work harder than anyone I know, for longer than you can ever imagine, during every single day, during all aspects. They just work harder, okay? So I'm not taking that out of consideration. I'm saying don't be a grouchy, old, nasty person that feels like they can control everything, because I can tell you what, they are not. You are not helping the situation by doing that. So you gotta understand where the outside world is coming from. They outnumber ranchers a ton, okay? So these people that are outnumbering ranchers, if you're the person that's like, I own this land, therefore I should have the right to everything, you can't also be the hunter that thinks that you own private property, right? So I've just said, I'm okay with ranchers doing what they have to do to make ends meet on their property. But then they have to consider that also includes feeding the animals that they're making money on. And you can't then go to the Fish and Game and say, oh man, they're destroying my crops. Well, you're not letting people on there. You're not giving access to the public to those animals, so you have to deal with what they're eating. That's the payoff. That's the trade-off for that happening. As a hunter, you also can't feel entitled to utilize somebody's private land. That's literally like saying, you know, somebody walking in your backyard can just walk in your backyard and do whatever they want. So I'm sorry, I'm getting off on this tangent here. I need to get back to the subject. Okay, so we have this distribution of elk, and you can understand why it's happening. We don't tolerate the predators as much on the private ground, so of course the animals are going there. Even if they're not going there, the ones that are there are reproducing, and their calf recruitment is probably way higher. So they're going to increase while the ones in the mountains are decreasing. So the first thing we have to do is we have to combine the two silos. We have to combine the two buckets. We can't separate predators from prey in management. They are associated. I don't even know how you could think as an educated person that they are not associated, that the number of prey animals is not associated or has anything to do with the number of predators. I don't know how you could ever do that. The second thing is, ranchers and hunters are on the same page. If we don't get on the same page, okay, if we don't come together to fight against the real enemy of the West, which is the weaponization of conservation, we are taking conservation, it is now being used as a weapon against us, because what they've changed the term of conservation to mean is hands off. You are a negative impact. All humans are a negative impact in the name of what they now classify as conservation. So companies worldwide banks are giving loans with a lower interest and a higher dollar amount, like of $900 million, to massive corporations, so they can slap a little sticky label on their thing that says, I bought carbon credits, which means I'm offsetting my footprint in the world. And they can charge more for their product. They get better interest rate loans. This is about money. So that is the enemy. If we fight against each other, if the hunters are constantly fighting against the ranchers are viewing the hunters as the problem, and the hunters are viewing the ranchers as the problem, guess what? We're fighting over here while they're hanging a sign on your public ground that says you can't go there anymore. And that is all down to the fact that we cannot also have the federal government deciding how many predators we should have without considering prey numbers or considering the resources that come from that land into communities and economies, because hunters bring in tons of money. Hunters bring in so much money that they actually literally pay for the management of our public lands entirely. And if we replace that with carbon credits, that's a different story. You can go to highlonesome.com, highlonesomesociety.com, I'm sorry, highlonesomesociety.com, where I'm putting together training about that very subject. How that works. Why did carbon credits and biodiversity credits, why are they bad? They are literally the gateway, the door to removing hunter and human recreation interaction with nature in our public lands and our private lands. That literally the way to do it. And if you want to know how that works, go over there. I'm going to be posting 2 more segments to that training today if I get time here. So anyway, let's look. I'm going to look at the questions, see if I covered everything. So I'm going to end with this, and then I'm going to go look at the questions. We now have those receipts. We understand how that works. Now people say that they migrate away from where the predators are. I'm not sure that they do migrate, that the elk and deer migrate away. I think what happens is you have a calf recruitment in the public ground of 10% here because of all the predators. Over here on the public ground, private ground, where there already is prey animals, there's already deer and elk, right? But their calf recruitment, the amount of babies that are surviving, is 80%, right? Plus the fact that you're not killing near as many adults as you're killing in the public ground. It doesn't take very many years and you're going to see this like this. People say, well, they just moved. Elk just don't decide to just move. I mean, deer, they live in an area, they live in that area, and they die in that area. And I don't know, there might be some scientific thing that says that they do. I've never seen one. I think that what happens is these are surviving, these are dying. So you're seeing this like this balance shifting. It isn't really that they're moving out there. It's the fact that these are surviving and these are dying. Okay. Remember the 30 by 30 connection, and this is all in the highlonesomesociety.com. The 30 by 30 is something that the UN started. Now, the current administration did reverse it all as far as we don't have any targets. That's not our incentive in the United States anymore. But the incentives for all that, the financial mechanisms are still in place. So we're dealing with that in a massive way. That is actually your real enemy. The 30 by 30 plan is where the UN stated the target of making the world, 30% of the world, conserving 30% of the world by 2030. That's what we're up against. Now, even though we've reversed that in this country, at least for now, all the mechanisms that are actually bringing money in to that end are still happening. So that's why the carnivore or the predators are worth more money on the credit market by far. They triple the value of your credits. So, and the prey don't. So the prey has no effect. So they don't really care in that market if you have no elk, if they all die. That's your real enemy. Don't fight against each other. The landowners have to get on the same page as the hunters. The hunters have to get on the same page as the landowner. At least find some common ground, because if they don't, what I said is actually going to happen. You're going to be fighting while the big companies come right out and hang a sign on your public land that says you can't go there anymore. Okay, so we have to demand that carnivore and ungulate management goes together in the state plan. That has to happen. And then I don't know how this happens, but I don't know how we accomplish it, but we have to get the weaponization of the Endangered Species Act to no longer be a factor. Because right now, that is what's hindering us from any kind of management. Even if you were to associate the two, how would you ever manage the predators when they're on the endangered species list? So like wolves, I'm sorry, I gotta take a drink of coffee here. So for instance, wolves are partly on the endangered species list in several states. And you think, well, they must be endangered, but they're not. There's 250,000 wolves worldwide. There's at least 50,000 in Russia. We don't really know. There's 20 to 30,000 in Europe. There is 1,000 of them in Saudi Arabia. There is wolves in Israel. There's wolves all over the Northern Hemisphere. And there's wolves now in the United States, in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, of course, also Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, New Mexico, Arizona, Minnesota, and Wisconsin are absolutely getting creamed by these things. And nobody's even talking about them. They're just destroying the deer populations there. Michigan has tons of wolves. There's even a pack in North or South Carolina. I can't remember which one. Wolves are not even close to endangered. In Mexico. Anywhere. They're not endangered. So the Endangered Species Act was a good idea. It was a good concept. Keep species from becoming extinct. But what they're using it as now is like, okay, in area, they're saying states, but it's like area 301 or 313 can have that the zebras are endangered in that area because there's only 2 of them. They don't tell you that those are in a zoo and zebras were never there in the first place, but that's literally what it's being used for, is it's total nonsense. So Yeah, somebody says hello from Alaska. Well, welcome. Alaska has tons of wolves. Canada has enormous amounts of wolves. So there is no shortage of wolves. They are not endangered, but they're using that against us to be able to even manage their numbers at all. So, okay, now we have to realize that right now they are using our mountains, the mountains that you hunt, that you enjoy, you camp in, you hike in, you take your family to. They're taking those and they're actually using them as a ticker symbol. We're selling these to billion-dollar corporations. This is what we have to wake up to, because the only way to stop this stuff is to stop, at least limit the amount of fighting we're doing amongst ourselves, and actually stand together against the real issues so that we can harvest timber. We can do what's best for the wildlife. We can manage for abundance. I would love to see our wildlife herds go back to the way they were before, when they looked more like Colorado's wildlife herds, but we can't. In fact, we're going the other way. We're going to throw wolves in Colorado and destroy their wildlife populations. And it's costing taxpayers to do it. I mean, Colorado right now, in the last 12 months, has spent $140,000 per wolf of whoever's tax dollars if you live in Colorado, your tax dollars are being used for that, to put wolves in there. $140,000 per wolf. That's a net loss, but according to the worldwide eco-economy, it's actually a net benefit. It's a net gain. But it's not to you. It's only to some massive corporation or some huge land trust that is suing the state, making money off of taxpayer dollars in that way, and then turning around and selling credits on the private market to some massive corporation so they can stick a little green label on their product and say, we are carbon neutral. That's really what's happening, guys. So I just wanted you to understand. Hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying there. And go to the highlonesomesociety.com. That's my community. I need your support as well, because I'm putting out lots of content on this. I'm going to be going on several trips here that's going to be delving into a lot of this, because it helps to understand. When they talk about predators, like, well, there really isn't a problem because there's 170,000 elk, which is way above objective. But you don't even understand unless you watch something like this. You don't understand what objective is. You don't understand where the elk are, what they're talking about when they're moving. They're saying they move. No, they're not moving. The elk behind me don't just all of a sudden decide, well, you know what, it's too much pressure here, we're going to leave. No, they've lived there all their life. They're just dying while other elk are surviving. So it's definitely, the distribution is changing, but you have to understand all these things. Okay. I absolutely love our wild places, and I want to see them stay wild. I want to see them be abundant with wildlife so that when we go to the wild places, and I'm a Christian, so I feel that we have a mandate from God to be stewards of what we're given. And that doesn't mean insanity and just let everything go to chaos. That means to actually manage it. And I believe we can. We can manage it for abundance, which makes it more beautiful, more abundant with game. That doesn't mean you have to eliminate all the predators, but you have to consider what numbers are sustainable for them with human interaction. And we can have resources coming into our communities. We can be a net economic gain from the resources in the mountains and not hurt our food supply and enjoy hunting and recreation like you've never seen before in more beautiful areas than before. We can do all of that if we actually use our God-given brains to figure out how to do this, instead of just going on, oh, Disney, Disney says, I mean, whether they say it or not, in The Lion King, they manage for the circle of life. They don't do that. Not in real life. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. So let's get to, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments here. In the next few minutes, I'm going to go through and just see what you guys are saying. Okay. So somebody says, I hear there's a chance the grizzlies are going to be delisted. So there's a lot of groups that have been working on delisting the grizzly bear, but it is not an easy road. So one of the major problems we have is called the Equal Access for Justice law, which it was a good, again, same thing, good thing when it was implemented. It means that anybody can sue the federal government. And if they settle or they win, right, the federal government, taxpayers, it's not really the federal government, you guys and me are paying for the attorney fees on both sides. So literally any timber sale in Montana or most of the West, in Montana, I kind of know some of the percentage numbers. They figure they're going to have to spend 60% of the budget for the timber sale in legal fees on both sides. So we're actually paying the enemy to sue the government to stop us from harvesting timber or grazing in the mountains or hunting. They sue every week, it seems like, on saving more wolves. There's lawsuits going on in Montana all the time right now to try to eliminate the wolf hunting season altogether or stop it because they're not counting them right. It's always some technicality. And we're financing that through the Equal Access for Justice law. So that has got to be changed. The grizzly bears are probably, because of that, because of all the lawsuits, they're probably not going to come off the endangered species list right away. We've been fighting this for years. We're so far above the objectives that they set for it that it should be an unbelievable success story. And it's not, because they will never be satisfied. That's why, as ranchers, as hunters, don't ever convince yourself that if we're meekly just stand in our corner and don't say anything, and we just meekly, well, maybe they do have a point, maybe we need more wolves. The more you compromise, they never compromise on their stance. Guess what? They're getting paid for it. We're not, but that's how they make money. Are you going to leave your livelihood because somebody gives you a little bit? No, you're going to keep on going. So to think that we're just going to get rid of them by complying with them somewhat is ridiculous. It won't happen. We have to fight this. We got to change the way that law works somehow. And my job is not to change those things. My job, as I see it, is to educate the public so people actually understand how these things work. Unite the people who actually can manage our wild places and our private land. Our incredible West is going to blank in a basket because we're just allowing this. And a lot of times I hear all the time now in my comments from ranchers, oh, it's not that bad. I think wolves actually have a major part into play. Yes, they do. And if we just say, yep, basically what they're saying, I think we need to roll over and take some of this and just deal with it. That won't stop it. They're not satisfied until your ranch land is not being used for cattle at all and not being used for recreation and people, because their ideology says the best thing for that land is the Garden of Eden, utopia, which doesn't exist, by the way. Okay. Any questions? And so somebody said, if you're a hunter and not hunting predators, you're not doing your part. That is true in a way, but one of the things about predator hunting is so you used to be able to hunt predators and actually get a little bit of money from it. It takes a lot of fuel. I've been trying to hunt wolves here for a while, and it is hard. It takes a lot of miles just to find these things. The thing is people have this totally unbelievable, it's so far off of what people think as far as the numbers of wolves. You don't need that many wolves to kill an enormous amount of game animals, because all you got to do is wipe out the calf crop one year. Well, that just takes 10 wolves to do that in a 150-mile area, right? So they can decimate a herd very quickly, even with a limited number. Well, those 10 wolves in a massive area, you try to hunt them, they're really hard to find. And they're incredibly smart as well. So, and they've been hunted for a while now, so they're on the lookout. I would love somebody to teach me how to actually hunt these things. Okay, so Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we can do. I'm becoming more educated on what the real issues are, what's at stake, basically, and defining what we can do to really fix it. So to do that, we have to have a place, we have to have people getting together and understanding the concepts. So help me out if you can. Support me in what I'm doing. I'm going to take a lot of trips and really try to. I believe my job in this is to get the word out of why things are happening the way they are. Point out the real enemy. That the real enemy is not the hunter, not the rancher. The real enemy is the money coming from global organizations, the ideology that's being fed to the public. And we have to combat that with content. We can't just combat it by sitting in our rooms and saying, yep, they're bad. We have to combat it with literal information. So that's what I'm doing. So go to the highlonesomesociety.com. It's not it's sorry, highlonesomesociety.com, not the highlonesomesociety.com. And I'm also putting together a training in there where I'm breaking down how the credit system is literally selling the rights to our conservation on private and public land, because the states are trying to get involved in this. And I'm just going to scare you a little bit with this. Right now, all of the maintenance and management dollars for our public ground, for the recreation industry, is from, especially in places like Montana, 99.6% comes from, well, I think it's 99.9% actually, comes from hunter dollars. If they figure this out and they are able to sell what they call nature services, which is the water, air, carbon sequestration, and the biodiversity of our public lands, if they can sell that through credits to these massive corporations and get all these benefits from loans, what's going to happen is they're going to try to replace the hunter money as the money they use for management. Now, when you replace the hunter dollars and you're getting the money to manage this stuff from another source, which is basically a for-profit deal, but you're selling the credits, you're making the money from credits instead of hunters, and those credits go up in value the less human interaction you have with that land. That means the less footprints, the less tent sites, the less grazing, the less hunting, the less timber. All of that increases the value of the credits that can be sold. Where do you think, how is that going to benefit your access to public land? I can guarantee that if they can replace hunter dollars with dollars from corporate America for the management of that land, you're going to lose. I'm going to lose. All of us are going to lose. The only people that are going to win are the massive corporations who are actually making the money off that land. So I'm just trying to wake people up to that, and that's why I go to the highlonesomesociety.com. See what you can learn there. I'll be posting more and more this week. I'm going to be taking a trip this week to try to get do some more investigative journalism kind of style videos, but I want them to be entertaining as well. So I take my truck camper out and do stuff that would get another crowd listening, right? So, all right. Okay, so I don't know so I would have to do, somebody asked, like, Trinity, have you ever considered doing a webinar training? I'm not really sure how that even works, so I'll look into that. I will be speaking at a couple events coming up here. I'll keep you posted on when those are and where they are, so you guys can and if you have an event and you want me to come speak at it, make sure you reach out, send me an email. We got to do what we can. I think that's what I can do, is just get the word out. There's other ways to do things. I'm trying to discover what those ways are, those actual ways that you can make a difference. But I think my one of my main jobs in this is to try to get the word out to the public, because we make decisions not not based on science or capacity, obviously, or anything practical. We make decisions based on ballot boxes, which is how many people you can get to vote for something. And if we get the public against us, you're done. Because if they can just vote out any, that's why the danger of true democracy is the mob rules. It doesn't take into consideration the people who are actually living on the land. It doesn't take into consideration how much food they're producing. It doesn't take into consideration anything like economic value. Instead of spending taxpayer dollars, bringing in economy and industry, it doesn't take those into effect. It's all about how many people you can actually convince to vote for you. And that's a dangerous thing to have. And that's why they have wolves in Colorado. So, all right. I'm going to jump off. I'm going to actually go get another cup of coffee. I got to cut some firewood this morning because my wood pile is going down a little bit. Although Montana has had like less winter than the rest of the country this year for some reason. I'm shocked, but whatever. I'm okay with it. I love this kind of weather. It's really hard to hunt wolves in though, because you can't find any tracks or nothing. But all right, I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks for being on here. I'm Trinity Van Den Aker. Until next time, God bless.